manually, people started to get on board. Some even picked up PowerShell, which was nice.
Yeah, that's often once people make it over the initial hurdle of understanding why, they start seeing the benefits, and that it's we've seen some environments where people look at it and feel like you're trying to eliminate my job. Like I'm the person who goes and fixes the things that break when we deploy stuff. And if you're trying to automate this, or you're trying to make bring everybody together to deliver this, that's somehow a threat to what they do. It takes a little bit of effort sometimes to get people over that initial hurdle to say, this isn't about eliminating your job or not needing your skill set anymore. This is about freeing you up to put those valuable skills that you have on more proactive things that really help the company and the organization in a much more meaningful way than just, hey, my pager went off at 3 a.m. and I have to go fix it.
Who likes that, by the way?
Very, very few people.
Interesting. Anybody else in the audience kind of have their own take on this?
I have a question for the audience, if that's okay.
Shoot.
How many people have done training around DevOps, or not to overuse the DataOps term because it all kind of falls under the same umbrella, but how many people have had any type of training on DevOps and what it means and how it adjusts, the practices that they may be applying? Go with silence means probably not very many people. I find it interesting because this is one of those things that sometimes it seems like companies just expect people to pick up and start doing. And it is very much a mindset shift for a lot of organizations. And often I've seen the people who are in the training tend to be very narrowly focused. So they'll take just the operations folks or just some developers and say, oh, you're now our DevOps folks and you're responsible for all this. And you have to figure out all the pieces end to end, including the data, the infrastructure, everything. And that is, it's a shame when that happens, because the whole idea of DevOps is you're really bringing together all these people. So you want more people in your training for this, and definitely not try to limit it to just a small subset. The more people who understand the needs, who can actually provide the value that they may have as developers, DBAs, operational folks, infrastructure folks, under that umbrella, it makes a significant difference in the success of these kind of initiatives.
Interesting. So John, give you a lightning round, and the title of this presentation was originally Top 5 Blockers to Success. So in 60 seconds, what's the number one blocker to success?
The number one blocker to success is, sorry, I'm just making sure I have the right slide up, not deploying frequently. So a lot of people start this and they say, hey, we're going to deploy and we're going to get it automated and we're going to do it monthly. That's not frequent enough. You want to deploy as frequently as you possibly can. And there's a mantra from the development world that is, if it hurts, then you're not doing it frequently enough. Because often people will say, I can't deploy my database, every month. My God, that's going to create, chaos and set puppies on fire, and it's going to be the end of the world. The challenge is the more frequently you have to do something, if it creates pain for you, you will figure out how to fix that pain, and it will be better if you keep doing it frequently and you force yourself to make the process better. So if something hurts, do it more often, and you'll figure out how to make it not hurt so much.
Interesting. Anybody on the phone feel like their organization doesn't deploy frequently enough?
We definitely were there a couple of years ago. When a deploy takes half a year to get into production, then you just feel that something is wrong. And now it's on demand. Anything that we change, we're in production before the websites are even in production. So I'm really looking forward to what other people are doing or hoping to do.
Yeah, again, it's just one of those things that the more often you do it, the easier it becomes. You're not biting off on such huge changes that it's scary to deploy. And if you're deploying every week or even daily, then it just becomes part of what you do. It's not a scary process anymore. I usually around this slide in my presentation, I'll ask the question, how many people don't deploy on Fridays and, don't want to deploy at 4:00 in the afternoon because they know that they're probably giving up either their weekend or their night if that's when they deploy. And the answer is usually everybody's hand in the room goes up because nobody wants to do that. That's actually a sign that you're not deploying frequently enough if you're scared to deploy right before the weekend or right before you leave for the day. It means that you have challenges in your deployment processes that you probably need to iron out.
I love that you use the management word challenges. That's,
Yes. So anybody in the audience have any of those experiences you want to call out for late Friday deployments that maybe didn't go the way you wanted them to? I know I have personally. I had one experience. I've not been in the deployment game too much, but myself personally had one where we were trying to deploy nothing major. We deployed like once every 2 weeks or something like that, and it was just a analytics solution. And the VM we were deploying to just was gone. It just decided to die on us. And we spent like 3 or 4 hours on Saturday clicking the refresh button on the Azure portal, waiting for a VM to come back. And if we had a little bit more automation in place, and maybe some resiliency on our VM, then I could have gotten half of my Saturday back. But I wonder if anybody else has a similar experience.
We've definitely had some things in the past that we had some deployments that went out on Fridays, not for the commercial product, but for some internal support systems like our backing licensing system and some of those things. And one of them actually was Azure related. We were upgrading from using an on-prem database to move it to Azure, and determined that the now I'm drawing a blank on the term, not the DNS, but the CNAME pointer. The only person who had admin privileges to actually change that was actually out of the country for the week. And nobody knew this as the deployment process started. So everything went out, was pointing to a different place, and everything just kind of stopped dead because it couldn't find the resources that it needed to find. And it taught us a lot about how we need to handle rollback scenarios in some of those, because there was literally no way to move forward. Typically, when I think about frequent deployments, the roll forward approach is kind of preferred over doing rollbacks. But in this case, we couldn't roll forward because we literally couldn't point the resources to where they needed to go. until this person was accessible again. And we realized our rollback procedures were not where they needed to be. So that actually got shored up very quickly after that. It only takes, somebody used the term in a meeting we were having today of, how many kicks from a mule does it take before you start making the appropriate changes? And ideally that number is 1. You get kicked once, you learn from it, and it never happens again.
So John, if you don't mind me asking, maybe you know, maybe you don't, at SentryOne, how do you guys handle all of this data ops? Because you have different products, so you probably have different repositories, different teams working on different repositories, or are teams working on multiple repositories? And how do they handle this?
Yeah.
Is this something you can talk about?
Yes, I can. We have multiple products, and those products have different requirements for them. So we have the SQL-centric product, and it leverages an on-prem database. So we have a schema there that our customers are installing and basically running on their SQL servers. That one's a little bit more of the traditional model in that the application handles database schema updates. So you get a new version of the application, it pushes schema updates, and we have to make sure we maintain appropriate levels of backwards compatibility, upgrade the data appropriately. We have some constraints on what versions we'll upgrade to and from to help simplify that process a little bit. But that's kind of the more traditional application database model for what we're doing there. Now, internally, we can have people developing on different versions of the software simultaneously. So we might have some people working on a release or a feature that's scheduled for release in 3 months. So they might be using a different version of the database than a different team who's doing a maintenance release for the current version of the software. So there we have the schema deployment actually baked in as part of our deployment pipelines. We're very heavy Azure DevOps users for that. So all of our pipelines are baked into there, and we use a combination of PowerShell as well as some of the Azure script, what's the term, task in the pipeline. Yeah. But basically that's all automated end to end. So you check in your source code. We actually use change management scripts for the database updates. You put those in place, and it all just gets pushed out to a staging environment that will say, okay, this code is associated with this version of the database. We're going to deploy that, run it, and our UAT folks can go into that staging environment and look at it. Then we also have SaaS products, so cloud-based. The database for those is typically running as an Azure SQL DB. And we do the same thing there, where for our development environments that are hosted in Azure, it's end-to-end deployment of those things. For production, we're a little bit more controlled currently because we have a limited number of schemas out there. So we have 2 primary products in that space right now. One is our document product, and the other is Monitor. Document uses a little bit of SQL, but it actually uses mostly Cosmos DB for the data storage behind the scenes, and Azure Blob Storage or table storage for other parts of it. Cosmos is easier to work with from a schema update perspective. So it's a document database. You just change the format of the documents that you're saving in it. For Monitor, we are using the Azure SQL DB a little bit more heavily. And so we have automation scripts that can actually, and we use a multi-database approach there. So different tenants of that service have different instances of the database. And we have an automation that's part of our pipeline that actually deploys the changes across all the different instances of the database that it needs to when it's deployed. And that is actually using a ring-based model for those deployments. So we have internal rings, and then we have customer-facing rings.
That sounds like an awesome setup. Do you do percentage-based rollouts on internal or customer-facing deployments?
So right now it's relatively straightforward. We have an internal development ring that is basically what our developers use to deploy to and test and show features to product people and people for UAT. Then we have an internal ring that we actually use to monitor our internal SQL servers, and that is, I wouldn't say it's production, but it's semi-production. So we're actually using that for production workloads. It's where we dog food the software internally before we actually release it. We don't do percentage right now it rolls from the dog food ring to the customer ring once we've gotten sign off or the appropriate checks and balances there of, hey, we feel comfortable with what's out there. We don't do the percentage based yet. We've modeled that. It just right now hasn't seemed to be a significant enough need to actually roll it out. So.
Okay, cool. And you had 4 more DataOps bullet points, I believe.
Yes, I have. I do. Let's see. One of the other blockers. So the number 1 blocker was not deploying frequently enough. The number 2 is not automating enough. So sometimes you see, hey, we've automated this, except for this step, and that's still somebody looking at it. I'm actually a huge believer in gating processes around deployments. And by gating, what I mean is stuff goes somewhere and it sits until somebody says, yes, we're good, open the gate. What that doesn't mean is that somebody's doing any manual work besides saying, approve, go. What often happens, though, is there's this one part that people say, hey, I can't quite figure out how to automate this yet, so we're just going to keep doing this manually. When this comes up, then instead of working out a script that can handle this in the future, then somebody's going to still go in and open up Management Studio and make a change directly to the database, or update that certificate, or apply this Azure property setting change. There's really no reason not to automate everything. That is the goal. And if you don't automate it, it's not repeatable. Like, you're relying on a person to repeat it. The concept that we have always talked about is the truck number. And it's kind of a dark look at this, but it's unfortunately a scenario that I've actually faced in the past, is how many people get hit by a truck before your team or your process fall apart. And that number has to be higher than 1, or you're in serious trouble. I've never had a team member get hit by a truck, fortunately, but we have had people who had unexpected illnesses or family situations that took them out of pocket, basically with 0 notice, and they were completely unavailable for extended periods of time. And that exposed, in that particular scenario that I was working in, exposed a lot of things that we were overly dependent on that person for. So there's, the way I look at it, at least, there's no such thing as automating too much. The more you can automate, the better.
Yeah, so I have a nice one. You might not know this. Your team members probably do, though. In Azure DevOps, you can actually add a task for manual action. And every time your automated process comes to that task, everything grinds to a halt, And whoever you put in there to be notified for the manual action, they get an email. And in your statistics, assuming you pull statistics from Azure DevOps, you will see how long this task was blocked, how long this pipeline was blocked by this person. So instead of explaining the bus factor or truck factor to people, which might not be that nice for some people, having them feel the pain that everybody is feeling, like everybody's waiting on you to do this, people respond very well to that because nobody likes to be the blocker in the process. That's something we learned.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was aware of the manual task, but we hadn't leveraged it in that way. But that is probably nicer than explaining the truck number to people. So.
Yeah.
When on the topic of emergencies, I give you 2 words and let you take it where you want, John. Emergency hotfix.
Yes, that's 3 words. Hotfix. That's gonna be 1 word. Yeah, so there are always scenarios that require rapid response. This is part of the reason that I say you can't ever automate enough. If you have your deployment process automated end to end, then an emergency hotfix is really fix it in the source and push it to the end. That deployment process ideally is not something that takes hours and hours. It's something that you can have a pretty finite time frame associated with. There are some of it depends on the type of emergency hotfix as well. So if it is something that is a critical, the server is down type of issue, it depends on why the server's down and what remedy steps that you have for that. So we've certainly, with a customer-facing outage for our SaaS products, as an example, we pretty quickly resolve those in whatever is the most expedient way possible. And then if it actually requires, I will say, typically most expedient way possible is almost never code updates or database updates. It is things like this Azure service has an outage. We need to switch over to point to a different region, or something along the lines of, hey, we deployed and there is something wrong in the code that was deployed that we didn't account for, and it broke the system. In those cases, we do leverage Azure capabilities like deployment slots for our web applications, so we can swap back to the original deployment and we're back up. So that's the most expedient way to do that. We've actually taken the steps of automating, call it the smoke test for our deployment. And if the smoke test fail, the deployment will automatically swap back to the original spot. So even that process can be part of your automated deployment. So emergency, again, it depends. But if it's code or a data schema change, then typically, even there, we still go back to the original source, make the fix, and repush the deployment through the process. So that helps keep us honest too.
Well, what are your thoughts on getting every code change to production as fast as possible, which when automated basically means within hours or minutes, and having feature flags dictate whether something is active, yes or no?
Yeah, so 2 parts to that, and actually we have a comment in the chat about the smoke test, so I'll try to address all 3 of these. Getting things to production as fast as possible. That one to me depends a lot on the company culture. So if your company is very focused on not having, let's say you have external customers that you're providing a service to. Maybe you care very much that those external customers do not see problems. You probably don't want every time a engineer checks in source code that goes all the way to production automatically. That increases the likelihood that they see problems. On the other hand, maybe it's internal applications and the customers are very excited about seeing new features as soon as they're possibly available, and they have a lot of tolerance for things that might not work 100% the way that they would like. In those cases, yes, let it go, check in and it surfaces on the production app in an hour or 30 minutes. The other part of that actually does kind of go back to the smoke test. If you feel like you can get adequate smoke test to give you the confidence that what you're releasing doesn't have problems, then that's a great solution to that. The smoke test can be a variety of things. If you're talking about a website, it may be just sanity checks that say, yes, I can connect to all the website's endpoints and they respond. I'm not getting 404 errors or things like that. When we talk about data, I'm a big fan of actually querying the database to ensure that data matches expectations. And that can be things like, does the schema actually look like I expect the schema to look, which you can do through comparison queries and those types of things. But as important as the schema updates is also, does the data look like I expect it to look? So being able to test and say, hey, we rolled out these changes and they've been running in our canary ring for, a day. The data matches our expectations of the data post this change. So maybe we've changed the way we're calculating a value. Maybe we've started collecting new value. The smoke test there, maybe it's been running and we're actually seeing values that are within our expected range within that column, versus a failure might be, hey, we're just seeing nulls in this column, so we're not actually collecting what we expected to collect. So the smoke test can vary a good bit depending on what the actual functionality is, but the key thing is you're looking for something that says the system's not working the way I was expecting. Circling back to the feature flags, I think feature flags are a key component of modern development. So basically the idea of a feature flag is within your code, you have the ability to toggle a specific feature on or off. If that feature is toggled off, then the code paths that the application executes, they don't leverage that feature, they don't go down that, they may continue doing things the existing way, or if it's a new feature, it may just not show up or be accessible to the user at all. When the feature is toggled on, then that menu option lights up, or that new way of doing the calculation is enabled, and the code starts going down that path instead. Robust feature toggling systems give you the ability to toggle that on and off in production, in your test environment. Potentially, you can toggle it depending on, am I in my canary ring or my customer-facing ring, even toggling it for specific subsets of your customer base, so that you could say, I want to give people the ability to test this out, but only this set of customers who said they're interested in actually experimenting with these. I'm going to use the Azure DevOps example again. They're honestly one of my favorite examples of how to do this right. If you use their interface, often in the web piece, you'll see, here's a preview feature. Would you like to see this? You can toggle it on, and then you can go back into your settings and toggle it off. So they let you control those feature toggles on a per user basis. And they also have the controls on the back end to say, here's an entire category of users that I don't want this to even show up for, or here's a category of users that I want them to have the ability to toggle it on and off. And here's another category that we're just going to automatically toggle this feature on for. So they have very robust handling of that. But one of the reasons that is so valuable is if a smoke test fails after you've deployed something and it's related to a feature, you can just toggle that feature off and get back to a running state. So if you have the emergency hotfix scenario, toggle the feature off that's associated with it, and you're back to a working application without necessarily even having to redeploy. It could just be a simple state toggle within your database or within your web configuration.
Yeah, love it.
So the two blockers we talked about so far were not deploying frequently enough, and then not automating enough.
Yes.
And I kind of wanted to open it back up to the rest of the audience, minus Jan for now. Thank you, Jan, for all your interaction. Anybody else from the audience kind of have their own experiences with those two blockers?
Has anybody ever regretted automating something?
Good one. Okay, well then let's give you another lightning round, John, with another 60 seconds on the clock. What's number 3 on your list of blockers?
Number 3 is not setting clear objectives. So this is definitely a process that you're going through as you start looking at how do we automate this, how do we adopt DevOps in the context of our data. You need ways to measure your progress on that. If you're not measuring it, then things tend to lose focus and go all over the place. So some of the things that I like. Sorry, and to back up a little bit, it also helps you understand why are you doing this. Like DevOps for the sake of DevOps is not really a reason. It's just, hey, I heard this cool buzzword and now we're going to do this. But looking at it from the standpoint of what does this do for me? What does this do for the rest of my department? What does this do for the rest of my organization? Leads to kind of clear goals in what you want to get. I tend, in terms of metrics that I look at a lot from a DevOps standpoint, cycle time and lead time. So these are basically measures of how fast, as a engineering department or a development group, that you can take requests and actually deliver those to your end users. So those are important. The goal of DevOps is to shorten those. So cycle times being faster is a good thing. Lead times being faster is a good thing. Availability. Are the services that you provide up and running and available to your end users on 24/7? Are they available only 4 days a week? There's a big difference there. The more availability that you have, the better. Customer satisfaction. So you have to offset the fact that you're deploying more quickly with that. And for some companies, deploying quickly means break it more often. And that's not a good thing. So you actually want to measure how happy are our customers with the releases that we're doing, so that you know that you're not making things worse, but you're making them worse more quickly because you're pushing things out faster. And then a key metric is how often do your deployments succeed versus fail. So ideally, you want that to be very, very high in the 95% plus range that deployments are successful. And by that we mean automated deployments, not deployments with a manual step in them. That was a little bit more than 60 seconds.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I guess I'll call out someone specifically, Moyo. What are your thoughts around that?
I'm so sure you're gonna call me. Thanks, John, for coming on the show and presenting. Really appreciate it. Setting clear goals, definitely that resonates well with me because I've seen instances where we begin a project and we don't really have a clear objective of what we're trying to achieve, and we run into issues. And the funny thing is, you run into issues, you don't even know they're issues because you don't really know what the outcome should be. So I haven't done much of automation or deploying frequently, right? Most of the time, if I'm deploying, I'm probably deploying once based on the kind of work I do. But I can relate very well with setting clear objectives. That's it.
Yeah, it definitely makes a significant difference in having a clear goal that you're working toward. I have seen organizations that do DevOps for the sake of doing DevOps, and usually, 6 months later, they're not really doing DevOps anymore, or they have something that they're doing that they call DevOps, but it's not really DevOps. So, being able to clearly articulate this is what we're working toward helps you know when you get there.
You've said that phrase multiple times now, John, and I want to make sure we understand it. DevOps for the sake of DevOps. So if DevOps is what we should be doing, then what situation is there in which we shouldn't be doing DevOps?
Yeah, so you shouldn't be doing DevOps for the sake of doing DevOps. The situation I would say that you don't want to be doing DevOps is when you don't actually have a clear reason for improving the metrics that I just talked about. Now, I will say I can't really think of too many organizations that don't benefit from being able to deliver their solutions faster, regardless of internal customers, external customers, whatever. Being able to react and deliver changes more frequently, almost always a good thing. I honestly really can't think of any situations where it's a bad thing. I think where you don't want to be doing DevOps for DevOps sake is when it's one organization, I won't call names on this one, but one organization that I had some experience with basically said we're doing DevOps because the person in charge of their development group read the buzzword and said, this is cool and it's going to make us go faster and we should do that. And really that's as far as the thought process went. So there wasn't a clear, well, what does going faster mean? There wasn't thought of some of those other metrics that I mentioned, customer success rates. How often are we succeeding or failing? The things that counterbalance just go faster. So we can go really, really, really fast if we just take away all our safeguards and we just throw stuff into production, as frequently as we possibly can. And we forget about, actually making sure that it meets customer needs or that it's tested, or, there's a number of things that we can remove from the equation if our sole focus is going faster. So sometimes that's what people hear when they hear DevOps. And sometimes that's less so recently. So this is a situation that I think has definitely gotten better over the last several years, but particularly in the early days, that was often kind of articulated as here's the value. That is a case where doing DevOps for DevOps sake is a bad thing, because you're getting only one facet of the benefit at the expense of all the other facets.
So I think Houston just brought up a really interesting point. Houston, you wanna chime in?
Okay.
We can hear you, Houston.
Oh, you can't hear me? Okay, I thought I was
Yes.
on mute. Okay, thanks. I will read what I wrote. Should using DevOps make the workplace more fun? not the reason for doing DevOps, but a side benefit?
So my opinion, yes, I think that if you have applied DevOps properly, it reduces stress, which absolutely makes working more fun. So I really enjoy not having to worry when we say, hey, we're doing a release or we're doing a new build or we need to push this to our internal ring. So we're gonna deploy that tonight. I don't stay up at night wondering, is that going to be successful? Are we going to have problems with that? I have confidence that we are monitoring and able to react to any issues that come up, which is another key part of DevOps. It's not just about deploying, it's also about monitoring what's been deployed and being able to react to it if there are problems, and being able to react quickly to sort out any issues. The fact that we have done this, we've worked through a lot of the challenges with it, means that there's a lot less stress associated with those things. And so I would say the less stress you have at work, the more fun it is being at work.
Thank you.
So John, you've given us a ton of good information, and I know we're coming up kind of towards the end here. So one, we can please send us your slides afterwards because we can post them on the site, and everybody can read kind of all the information you wanted to bring to the table tonight. And definitely thanks for going along with this this new format. You've talked a lot about DevOps for data from an application perspective. At our heart, we're an analytics group. We do a lot of reporting. We do a lot of data warehousing and machine learning and stuff. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've seen these DevOps for data principles applied in kind of the data warehousing and reporting space?
So some parts of it are easy. Machine learning, there's a lot of code involved with machine learning. And so that can follow kind of typical application processes. Where it gets sticky is dealing with the high data volumes. So it's easy. One of the techniques that I've used to manage continuous deployment of database changes is actually keeping multiple copies of the data. That sounds good when you're working with an application database and it's 100 megs or 500 megs or a couple of gigs. It sounds a little bit less appealing when you're dealing with a 50 terabyte data warehouse. So some of those things become more challenging. The other factor of that is the scale of deployments can change drastically. So if you need to push a database update and it involves recreating a significant amount of data, that can take your deployment from 30 minutes to multiple days in some cases. So a lot of that's part of the reason I think this is kind of a challenging topic in a lot of cases. The techniques that you can use in some scenarios are completely different than the techniques that you use in other scenarios. The key scenarios that I'm speaking of here are, is this a more traditional OLTP type of application, or is this a more BI data warehouse focused application? You can still do it, but you have to take the time and you have to take data storage into a lot more, you have to give that a higher priority in your planning. Some of the things that I think offset that we often spend a lot of time worrying about that aren't as significant as we think they are. A lot of feedback that I've had is, well, it costs too much to store a duplicate copy of this fact table in the database so that we can have rollback for this change that we're making. Well, yes, it's expensive. What does it cost you if you messed up that update and you need to roll it back? Is the cost of storing that extra data for a couple of days or even a couple of months less than having to go to all your customers or your end users and say, hey, we lost significant amounts of historical data because we didn't properly evaluate this change and we didn't have a rollback strategy. Probably not in most cases. So you have to look at a lot of those things in terms of, yes, it's going to have a dollar impact, but what's the dollar impact if the worst case happens, or even the not so worst case, but just a bad case. I think I'm a big fan of the data lake approach for a lot of things, because in many cases you can just treat that data as idempotent. It's there, it's written, and I'm not going to ever modify it again. I may pull it and transform it in different ways to meet new needs that are coming up or meet changes to the system, but I still have the original source that I don't have to worry about changing. So I can go back and recreate things as I need to, which gives you a good bit more flexibility in terms of, for example, updating the data mart schema, knowing that I don't necessarily have to preserve everything that was there. I can recreate what I had from the original source data. So it has its own set of challenges, but most of the challenges are the same ones that we run into with data warehousing and big data in general. Is you're just dealing with a lot more data, so time becomes a much more significant factor.
Interesting. One of the things I've seen personally is when we're using in the data warehousing world, we have multiple sets of tools that generally don't care much about each other. For instance, you've got an ETL tool who doesn't really care much about your database tool. You can mix and match them however you like, but as soon as they don't agree with each other, you have a problem. As soon as your ETL is trying to write a record to a table that doesn't have a particular column, your whole system's coming down. So what techniques have you seen for people to, at the very least, batch those together to ensure that my new pipeline I'm going to deploy also has a table to write to?
So the primary thing that I've seen companies do and that I advocate for is you put all of that into a continuous integration pipeline. So if you're making changes to an ETL script, that pipeline also includes the database deployment. And it verifies that those things work together. Not only that, the ETL includes the other pieces of ETL. So if you're working with SSIS packages, as an example, that when you do a build in your continuous integration pipeline, you're not just executing the SSIS package that you developed, you're executing all the other SSIS packages that might be pre or post the package that you created, so that you're actually getting a true production scenario in terms of what gets run, and all the predecessors and all the successor steps are actually in place. It's true if you're using ADF as well. You really want to make sure that you're not running those things purely in isolation, because I'll tell you, having worked for a long time with SSIS, I can get an SSIS package to work in isolation given a little bit of effort. Making it work in conjunction with all the other things that other developers on different teams may do, a little bit different story. And in some cases, it can pass the basic validation checks of, hey, the schema looks like I expected it to. But because an upstream package was lending data in a column in a format that the package didn't expect, it blew up at runtime. Those types of things come up unless you have good continuous integration pipelines that have automated testing in them. So if you leverage a integration pipeline but there's no testing, then you're effectively, it's like running Word, not doing anything with it, closing it and saying, hey, Word works great. Well, okay, you haven't really tested anything. But running your entire ETL pipeline with the appropriate version of the schema deployed from your source control system, and I guess I should say, all of this should be in source control. If you're not, I say this a lot in presentations, if you're not storing your data schema, your database schemas, your ETLs, basically everything that you work on as a developer in source control. That is the one thing that you should take out of this whole conversation that you must start doing immediately. Source control is the key to the whole thing. But when you have that, then you can actually set up a continuous pipeline that says, take all those pieces, deploy them, execute them, validate that they're running successfully, and you will catch things like the schema got changed, or this upstream package has been, developed to support a big int, and this downstream package only supports ints. And so far it's been fine, but we just crossed the boundary of int to big int, and now it starts blowing up. Those are the things that you need in order to catch those before they show up in production.
Interesting. Oh, thank you. So one last question before we open it up to any final thoughts. You mentioned a few times about how we have a lot of different reasons for doing DevOps, and we talked a lot about the 700 questions you got to ask before you start DevOps. But we all know in the real world, my boss is going to walk into my office and say, "Hey, we're doing DevOps." So what is a baby step I can take to get started in a way that provides value quickly?
I'll go back to what I just mentioned. If you're not doing source control, start doing source control. There's really no point in even proceeding past that step if you're not already there. On the assumption that you are doing source control, which is good, and I highly encourage it, then the first step that I would take is actually looking at the continuous integration and continuous testing. And by continuous testing, I mean incorporate the testing into your continuous integration pipeline. So basically, this is taking what you have in source, actually building it, deploying it to a test environment, running the test associated with it. If you don't have testing in place as part of your pipeline, then all you're really doing is enabling yourself to deploy bad code very quickly. And that's not a good thing. So making sure that you have appropriate testing is I think, as part of your continuous integration, is really the key thing that I would recommend as a first step.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, John, for those tips. Do you have a hard stop at 7:30?
They're about 7:45.
Okay. Okay. So we'll open it up here in like 60 seconds for any final questions. Do have one question to the audience, kind of from a CBIG perspective. This new format we tried tonight, more conversational, less webinar oriented. Did you like it? We got one love it. Got a couple of yeses. Okay, great. So yeah, this is something we'll try again. Thank you so much, John, for coming. For those of you who are interested in either presenting in this format or in a different one, or please reach out to myself, or we have Moyo on the call, or Michelle, or you can reach out on the website as well. Just let us know, and we'd be happy to see you back here next month. So at this point, I'll kind of hand it over to John and the audience. Ask away, and John will stick around for as long as he can.
I just want to say I enjoyed this format as well. I much prefer kind of having a discussion versus me just reading slides. So.
So I'll pick on one person in the audience because I actually know this person. Tiku, ask a question. Oh, Tiku's gonna make me look bad. Okay, well, anyone else? Tiku did. Oh, Tiku's having family issues right now.
Yeah, this
I fully
is
understand.
the joy of doing these meetings from home.
you guys couldn't hear it, but there was a good 30 minutes of just solid screaming from upstairs. So I fully understand. Anybody else have any questions for John? Either on topic or maybe even off topic.
Houston as what ADF is. It was mentioned.
Oh yes, Azure Data Factory. So it's the cloud-based Microsoft Azure ETL tool. Brad, I'm going to forward the slide deck over to you.
Sure. So I guess that's it. If nobody has any more questions, we can end the recording here. As I said, please reach out if you're interested in presenting, either next month or in the upcoming months. John has provided some of his contact information. You can certainly contact him if you have any questions, or you can reach out to myself or Moyo or Michelle from the CBIG side as well. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for hosting this. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John.